When it comes to agentic coding, when you're building out a more complex application or even like a complex feature part of your application, for example, in this video editor I'm trying to work on, we have this timeline at the bottom and we can zoom in, we can zoom out, we can pan left, we can pan right, we can click C to cut things, we can click and delete, and then we can basically undo stuff up here. We can click and drag. We can go over here and change so there is a lot of functionality built into this one little component. And often when you're coding with Opus 4.5, you'll ask it to add something, and then you'll find out that it just deletes something that you just recently added before. And so the technique I like to do is to use markdown files or requirement files to really document how the feature should work, so that when you prompt an LLM in the future, it doesn't go through and just delete all your stuff. Now, the first thing that might come to your mind when I say I use requirement files is something like BMAT or SpecKit, and there's a bunch of other frameworks that you can use when dealing with an LLM to make sure that the output is higher quality. I personally think those frameworks are a little bit overkill. I don't really want to become a markdown developer. I want to keep on doing iterative agile development. So this is the approach that I like to take. Here is my requirements file that describe how the timeline at the bottom should work. There's a lot of functionality. You can even press space to play and stop the timeline. I don't think I even mentioned that. But you can see here we document all the scroll controls, the dragging and the panning, the zooming. As you can see, it's just a really simple markdown file that lists out all the major features and all the little nuances of how that feature kind of works. I don't go into too much detail. I just want to keep it a pretty shallow overview with bullet points so that later on, if I ask Opus 4.5 to do something, hopefully it doesn't come through and delete some of this other functionality that it should have known about. There's two strategies of how you can do this. So if you open up a brand new project that you never used an LLM on before, the first thing I would probably do is generate a requirements file for the feature. I'll show you an example. I'm going to delete this markdown file and I'm going to start from scratch to kind of show you how I would probably do this. So on a brand new project, I would load up Claude Code or whatever LLM you like to do, and then I would find the timeline component. Okay, and this is a pretty large component. It's very complex, has a lot of different nested subcomponents as well. And so the first step I would do is I would drag this component into Claude Code or Cursor, and I'd probably prompt something like this. Can you please do a thorough analysis to understand all the different features that exist in this timeline component and its subcomponents, and document that in an MD file? Keep the documentation concise. I really just want a bullet point list of all the features and maybe some edge cases of those features so that later on, if I ask someone to edit the timeline, you don't break anything. My model is set to Haiku right now just so I can kind of demo this. Otherwise, I'd probably use Opus 4.5 for doing this analysis. Also, I probably could have taken a screenshot of this so I could use that as context as well. Sometimes having a screenshot can just help guide it to really understand what you're asking it to document. Now you might ask, why don't I just use test-driven development to document how the feature should work? And we can have a whole suite of like 50 or 60 tests to verify all these different features. And I would say that that is probably a good approach. I have just found that it slows down the iteration and the prototyping phases of development tremendously. What I mean by that is if I were to go in here and add a brand new teeny little feature, what ends up happening is the LM has to go and append a new test case, and then it has to run through the test case and verify that it added the functionality properly, and then it goes through and it runs through all of the tests to verify it didn't break anything, and then if it did break something, then it has to go and try to figure out what it broke. Sometimes it'll go in and actually change the test instead of fixing the implementation that it just broke. On larger high-risk projects, you should probably be doing test-driven development on everything. That's what I do at work. That's what I did before AI came into the picture. But for right now, for a rapidly prototyping something on a small one-man team project, this really takes away from iteration speed and it also burns through all your tokens. And so I have found that just doing a simple markdown file is good enough where you can still move fast, you have everything documented, and it helps guide the LLM to not potentially break something that you added, the last prompt. Let's open up timeline features. You can see here we have all of the core features documented. We have the segment visualization, playhead seeking, zoom and pan, segment tracking, etc., etc. Even started to document some of the props of the React component. This is something I probably wouldn't have cared about. I just want a high level, like from a business standpoint, what does this component do? We can keep it in, but you can see this is a component that ends up using 3,200 lines of code, right? It's built into smaller subcomponents. And having a high level overview of how this component works is really good for not only yourself, but the LLMs. So that's the first step. If you're going to open up a new project with Claude Code, find a complex feature, and you can ask it to build out this requirement documents before you start trying to iterate on it. For the next step, once you have this markdown file generated, this is what I do on every new feature that I add into the timeline, or if I want to modify. Let's say we wanted to make a teeny little modification to this timeline. For example, this purple bar that's right here, it's kind of hard to see. I would rather move it to be completely above the timeline so we can have like 2 separate rows. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this, and then I'm going to go ahead and just paste it over to Claude Code. And then I'm also going to tag in the timeline features MD file. Can you please move the overlays? Notice that in the picture I've attached to the prompt, there's a purple little bar above the timeline. I want that to be a completely separate row that lives above the timeline instead of actually attached to the top of the timeline. One, I give it some context, and then I prompt it with what I want changed. And then I give it some additional context of when you make this change, make sure you edit the timeline features MD file to represent the changes that you made to the business requirements so that it is completely up to date with these new requirement changes. Remember not to break any existing features that were documented in the timelines features MD. Those are the main things I would probably prompt Opus, just to make sure that it doesn't go off and start breaking stuff, because again, this thing is pretty complex. It has a lot of lines of code, it has a lot of subcomponents, and I don't want it to start breaking stuff that already exists. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick this off, and then we can come back and check to see if it did what I wanted. I'm starting to make some changes, and it's trying to move the overlays above the timeline instead of being attached to it with a top of 0. It probably has like a position relative or something. One simple prompt that added this change, and hopefully it didn't break any existing functionality. And what you also see is it's starting to update the timeline features, and it's going to add in displayed in a separate row above the main timeline track. And now in the future, we can keep on iterating on this without it potentially breaking other existing functionality. See that there's some text here that seems like it's cut off. I'm not even sure what this is. I might just take a screenshot of this and see if it can maybe fix this as well. I'm going to paste this one in. Notice at the top of the overlay, there seems to be some black panel with some text in it, but I can't see it because it's like an overflow hidden. Can you try to fix this as well? Again, do not break any of the existing functionality described in the timeline features.md file. There's another thing I like to consider. Is this better in the current context window that I have, or should I have kicked this off in a new context window? It's a timeline. We just changed the overlays, and in my opinion, keeping it in the same context window, especially since the context window is only 24%, I think we're going to get good results from this. This is not a hard or soft rule. Like, this is just something that I have an intuition that using the existing context window will give me better results. So I'm going to try it out. And if it doesn't, what I would do at least is I would add in all these changes, wait for this thing to finish. And if it does work, then we're good. If not, I'd probably just undo those changes and I kick off in a brand new context window, a very similar prompt that we did before, and then see if it can fix that tooltip above the overlay. Notice that Opus is done. And if we go back to the UI, let's test this out. And it looks like the tooltip is still cut off at the top. Okay, so what do I do at this point? Honestly, what I would do is I would clear out this context window. I would give a very similar prompt with another screenshot with this tooltip and let Opus try it one more time. If it still can't fix it, I would probably go and ask Gemini 3 Pro to fix it, because Gemini 3 Pro is a great model at fixing UI stuff. If that couldn't fix it, I'd probably go to GPT 5.2 and try that one more time. And then eventually, if that doesn't work either, I just go into the code and fix it myself. It's probably just a simple one-line CSS fix. And at this point, I'm just being lazy. Enjoy those tips and tricks. Be sure to check out agenticjumpstart.com. I have a course with over 75 videos, 11, almost 12 hours of content right now, talking about Claude Code, Cursor, how I do my workflows, agentic coding with the context window, prompting, etc. And then we build out a full stack web application using Tanstack Start and getting it deployed out to Railway with an actual Postgres database. So I think there's a lot of good content here, value in this course. But if you don't want to buy the course, there's still a free Discord community. Join and talk to other AI enthusiasts if you really enjoy coding with an LLM and doing agentic coding. And then lastly, there is a 10% off coupon if you use the words Happy New Year. I'll go ahead and just put it right here in this prompt. Happy New Year will give you 10% off on the course. That this is only going to last for 24 hours. After this coupon expires, I'm bumping up the price of the course because I'm continuously adding new videos to it. I'm making the value grow over time. So act now if you want to get that discount. All right, other than that, have a good day and happy coding.